My name is Catherine Monroe, and I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who had to ask permission to sleep in her own house. But life, as I learned, has a cruel way of turning generosity into weakness when the wrong people are watching. I was 67 when my husband, Robert, passed away. We'd been married 42 years. He was an architect with an eye for detail, and I was a teacher with a heart too soft for my own good. Together we built a home just outside Portland, Oregon. Not just a house, a life. White shutters, rose bushes that bloom twice a year. A little porch swing he built himself. After the funeral, that house felt too big for one woman and too quiet for one heartbeat. My son Daniel, our only child, suggested I move in with him and his wife Melissa. They lived about 20 minutes away, in a larger, newer home that still smelled faintly of new paint and expensive intentions. They had 2 kids, Emma 10 and Jack 8, and the thought of hearing laughter in the house again made it hard to say no. "Just for a while, Mom," Daniel had said, his hand on mine, the way Robert used to hold it when he wanted to persuade me. "You'll have your own room, the kids will love having you around. It'll be good for everyone." It sounded warm. Sounded right. So I rented out our old place, packed what I needed, and moved into the room they'd set up for me. Sunny, neat, and tucked away at the end of the hall. I brought my photo albums, Robert's old armchair, and the quilt I'd stitched the year Daniel was born. The first few weeks were peaceful. I made breakfast for the kids, helped them with homework, planted marigolds by the mailbox. Melissa worked from home, some kind of marketing job, and at first she seemed grateful for the help. She'd smile and say, "You're a lifesaver, Catherine," handing me grocery lists or the kids' schedules. But the smiles didn't last long. It started small. She began correcting the way I folded laundry, the way I seasoned food, the way I spoke to the children. Then came the little comments. "Oh, Catherine, you don't have to do that. It's not the 1950s anymore." Or, "The kids don't really need all that old-fashioned stuff." She started redecorating. My framed pictures of Robert quietly disappeared from the living room wall. My quilt, the one I'd draped over the couch, got stored in the garage. One day, even Robert's armchair vanished. Melissa claimed it was too worn, and had called a donation truck. I didn't argue. Not yet. I told myself she meant well, that maybe she was just trying to make space. But slowly, I began to feel like a guest in a place that was supposed to be my refuge. Then came the night everything changed. It was late September, the air sharp with rain. I was reading in bed when there was a knock at my door. Melissa stepped in, her smile polite but brittle, like a porcelain plate you knew would shatter if you looked at it too long. "Catherine," she began, "I hope you don't mind. My parents are visiting from out of state next week." "Of course not," I said. "It'll be nice to meet them properly." She hesitated. "Well, they'll be staying for about 10 days and we're short on guest rooms. So, Daniel and I thought maybe you could stay in the basement for a bit. Just until they leave." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. "The basement?" "Yes," she said quickly, like it was a reasonable thing to suggest. "We've cleaned it out, it's perfectly fine. There's a futon, a small bathroom, even a little heater." I stared at her. "Melissa, I'm not a guest here." Her smile didn't falter, but her tone did. "No one said you were. It's just temporary. Daniel didn't even come to tell me himself." The next morning, while I was moving my things downstairs, he kissed my cheek and muttered, "Thanks for understanding, Mom. You're the best." The basement smelled like dust and old wood. The ceiling was low, the floor cold. I sat on the futon, listening to footsteps upstairs. Melissa's bright voice, Daniel's quiet responses, the kids laughing, and realized something sharp and irreversible had shifted. I was no longer Catherine Monroe, mother, widow, teacher. I was just a placeholder in my own life. But I didn't cry. I made my bed neatly, unpacked my suitcase, and stared at the single bulb swinging overhead. And somewhere between humiliation and heartbreak, something inside me went still. Still but not broken. Because when you spend your life building a home, you don't forget how to rebuild. Even when the foundation has cracks. Especially when the cracks were made by your own family. That was the night I decided to stop apologizing for existing. "Mantelpiece clock, your move, Melissa," I remember thinking as I turned off the light. "You just told the wrong woman to live in the basement." The first night in the basement I didn't sleep. It wasn't the cold. It was the sound of their laughter filtering through the vents. Melissa's voice, high and bright, Daniel's low chuckle following right after. Every word was a reminder. I had been replaced in my own son's home. The next morning I climbed upstairs quietly. Melissa was at the counter, arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase, the kind of vase Robert and I would have called too fancy for every day. Her mother sat at the dining table sipping coffee, a woman with the same smug smile and posture as her daughter. When she saw me, she tilted her head. "Oh, you must be Daniel's mother," she said with exaggerated surprise. "Melissa told us you were staying downstairs." Staying downstairs. Not living here, not part of the family. Just staying downstairs. Melissa turned, her smile too wide. "Good morning, Catherine. Did you sleep all right down there? The heater should have kicked in by now." I smiled back. "Oh yes, Melissa. It's quite comfortable. You know, I used to teach in rooms colder than that basement. Builds character." Her smile faltered. Her mother snickered softly. That morning I realized something important. Melissa had expected me to be embarrassed, to shrink, to start disappearing quietly, the way people do when no one wants them around. But I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. The days that followed were a quiet performance. I played my part beautifully, polite, helpful, invisible. I cooked breakfast, cleaned dishes, folded laundry. Melissa's parents complimented me often, not out of kindness, but because they saw me as hired help. "Melissa, your mother-in-law is such a dear," her father said one evening while I was clearing plates. "She's like a live-in housekeeper." Melissa laughed. Daniel didn't. He sat there, staring into his wine glass, and for a flicker of a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who'd defend me in schoolyard fights when other kids teased me for being a teacher. But then he said nothing. And that silence cut deeper than any insult. On the 6th night of their visit, it rained heavily. The basement ceiling leaked. Just one steady drop of water near the corner. I placed a bowl underneath it and listened to the slow rhythm. It sounded like time passing. One drop for every moment I'd spent trying to please people who didn't see me. When morning came, Melissa knocked on the basement door. "Catherine, my parents need towels. Could you run a load of laundry before you head out?" "Head out?" I asked. She blinked. "Oh, I assumed you were going to the senior center today. Don't you usually volunteer or something?" I smiled. "Not today. I think I'll stay home." The look on her face, subtle panic under that polished calm, almost made me laugh. She didn't like me in her space. And suddenly I realized the power in that. If she wanted me gone so badly, I'd stay. And not just stay, I'd shine. I began cooking breakfast again, but not the quick oatmeal she made for the kids. No, I made waffles, bacon, and fresh squeezed orange juice. When the children came downstairs, their eyes lit up. "Grandma's cooking!" Jack shouted. Melissa appeared, forced smile in place. "Catherine, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," I said sweetly. "I figured since your parents are visiting, they might enjoy something warm." Her mother took a bite and said, "Oh, these are delicious, dear. Better than hotel food." Her father nodded. "Maybe you can get the recipe from Catherine." Melissa's cheeks flushed. Daniel mumbled something about being late for work, hiding his grin behind his coffee mug. That morning marked a shift. Melissa began leaving subtle signs of annoyance. Dishes left dirty, towels misplaced, small sabotages that only I noticed. But I didn't react. I had learned from Robert that the one who stays calm always wins. And in those quiet hours in the basement, as rain hit the window wells, I started to make a plan. A quiet one. The kind that doesn't need yelling or confrontation. Just patience and precision. The kind of plan that feels like justice, not revenge. The first step was simple: observation. Melissa handled all the household accounts. Daniel trusted her with everything. I'd overhear snippets of her on the phone, talking about credit cards, refinancing, liquid investments. Her tone was sharp, confident, but careless. She'd brag about leveraging assets to her friends, the kind of jargon people use when they want to sound smarter than they are. The first step was simple: observation. Melissa handled all the household accounts. Daniel trusted her with everything. I'd overhear snippets of her on the phone, talking about credit cards, refinancing, liquid investments. Her tone was sharp, confident, but careless. She'd brag about leveraging assets to her friends, the kind of jargon people use when they want to sound smarter than they are. And then one evening, when Melissa's parents were packing to leave, she left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. A spreadsheet glowed on the screen, labeled House Equity and Accounts. I didn't touch it, of course. I didn't have to. The name of the property file alone told me everything I needed. Daniel and Melissa Monroe Family Trust. My name wasn't there. But the house I'd once owned with Robert, the one I sold to them for half its market value to help them start a future, was. When Robert and I built our first home, we made sure every inch was paid for in cash. He believed debt was a leash. Now, sitting in that cold basement, I realized my son and his wife had wrapped themselves, and my kindness, in that leash. So I started digging quietly. I went to the local records office under the pretense of checking old property archives. A young clerk pulled up the deed, smiling. Ah yes, Monroe Residence. Beautiful place. It was transferred from Robert and Catherine Monroe to Daniel Monroe and spouse, with a life estate clause. A life estate clause. I had forgotten that part. Robert's idea. He'd insisted on adding it. It meant that even though the house was in Daniel's name, I still had legal rights to live there for the rest of my life. They couldn't evict me. Not legally. Not even if they begged. I walked out of that building into the sunlight, my heart pounding. For the first time in months, I wasn't trembling from anger but from clarity. Melissa had told the wrong woman to live in the basement, because the basement was still mine. That night, I slept soundly for the first time since Robert died. And when I woke up, I didn't feel invisible anymore. I felt patient. And patience, I remembered, is the most dangerous form of power. For the first time in months, I had leverage. It wasn't the kind of power people flaunt. No raised voices, no threats. It was the kind of power that sits quietly in your chest, waiting for the right moment to breathe. I didn't tell Daniel or Melissa about what I'd learned at the records office. Not yet. Knowledge is currency, and I'd spent my whole life giving mine away for free. Not anymore. That week, I began walking every morning, not to escape but to watch. I'd pass the neighborhood real estate signs, the rows of perfect lawns, and think about how much people paid for peace of mind they didn't actually have. Money, houses, vacations, all of it meant nothing without decency. Melissa thought the house gave her power. She was about to learn that ownership and authority are two different things. I started making small changes. Subtle ones. The family had grown used to me doing all the chores. So one morning I didn't. The sink stayed full of dishes. The laundry stayed unfolded. Melissa came downstairs, frowning at the mess. "Catherine," she called, sharp as a whistle. "Yes. Are you feeling all right?" "Perfectly fine." "Why?" She gestured at the kitchen. "The dishes." "Oh, I figured I'd let everyone handle their own today. I don't want to overstep." Her mouth tightened. "Oh, well sure. If that's what you prefer." But it wasn't what she preferred, it was what I decided. The silence after she walked away was satisfying in a way I hadn't felt in years. A few nights later, I overheard an argument upstairs. Melissa's voice was tense, clipped. "I told you, Daniel, we can't afford to fix the roof until next month. I have to move some money around first." "Move from where?" he asked. "I'll handle it. Don't start micromanaging." "You said we were doing fine," Daniel muttered. "We are." I smiled in the dark. Money trouble. Melissa had been juggling debts, maybe using my contributions more than she admitted. I didn't take pleasure in it, not exactly, but I knew what it meant. Her control wasn't as solid as it looked. The next morning I made pancakes. Real pancakes, fluffy, buttery, the kind Robert used to make on Sundays. Daniel came down first, rubbing his eyes. "Morning, Mom," he said. "Smells amazing." "Sit," I told him. "Eat while they're warm." He did, hesitating only when Melissa entered the room, already dressed for her video meetings. She looked at the table like she'd walked into the wrong house. "Wow," she said. "Big breakfast." "Yes," I replied. "We deserve something nice." Daniel smiled faintly. "You always know how to make the house feel like home." Melissa's fork clinked against her plate. That single line, "make the house feel like home," wasn't lost on her. It never is for people who are used to control. By late afternoon, I decided it was time to test the waters. Melissa was in her office, her door half open, voice carrying down the hallway. "I swear I'm dealing with it, Greg. We just need another 30 days before the refinance clears." Her tone was sharp, defensive. I told you my husband doesn't know everything I've had to cover. Just trust me, okay? I stepped into view. Her head snapped around. She ended the call instantly. Oh, Catherine, didn't see you there. I was just bringing tea, I said softly. You sounded stressed. Just work, she said too quickly. Nothing for you to worry about. I smiled and set the cup down. Of course, dear. It's just I couldn't help overhearing. You might want to check the house insurance policy. You know, just in case the refinance changes coverage. Her eyes flickered, surprise, suspicion. How do you know about that? I shrugged. Robert and I handled our own for 40 years. Old habits. Then I turned and walked away, leaving the scent of chamomile behind me like a quiet reminder. I'm still here. That night I found Daniel in the living room, scrolling through something on his phone. He looked tired. Everything okay? I asked. He hesitated. Yeah, just busy. You know how Melissa gets about finances. I nodded. I do, I said. Just be careful, Daniel. Numbers have a way of hiding truth if you trust the wrong person to read them. He frowned slightly, then gave me that same uncertain look he used to give me as a child when he was caught between loyalty and doubt. Are you saying something's wrong? I'm saying you should know what's happening in your own house, I said simply. I left him with that thought, quiet but heavy. Words like that don't vanish, they grow roots. 2 days later, the first rail crack appeared. I was in the kitchen when Melissa stormed in, phone in hand. Did you talk to Daniel about money? I didn't look up from the cutting board. I might have mentioned being careful. Why? Her eyes blazed. You had no right. Oh, I didn't tell him anything specific. Just motherly advice. Surely that's harmless. She took a step closer. You're trying to turn him against me. I met her gaze. Calm. Steady. No, Melissa. I don't need to. You're doing that yourself. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. And for the first time I saw fear. Not of me, but of exposure. That evening Daniel came downstairs. To the basement. He hadn't done that since the first night I moved there. Mom, he said quietly. Can we talk? Of course. He sat on the edge of the futon, rubbing his hands together. I didn't realize the house papers said you have residency rights. Melissa's been telling me something different. My heartbeat slowed, deliberate. And what did she tell you? That when Dad left everything to both of us, you signed it over. I met his eyes. I did no such thing. The life estate clause is clear. Your father insisted. He nodded slowly. That's what I found out today. Silence hung between us, thick with guilt. She shouldn't have lied, he said finally. I'll talk to her. I reached for his hand. No, Daniel. Don't argue. Let her think she's still winning. Sometimes the best way to teach someone a lesson is to let them reveal who they are. He looked at me for a long time, eyes soft with the kind of respect I hadn't seen in years. Then he said quietly, You've changed, Mom. I smiled. No, dear. I just remembered who I am. That night I went to bed knowing the storm was coming, but for once I wasn't afraid. Because storms are loud. And people like Melissa? They do. Hot beverage. Catherine Monroe had woken up. And when women like her wake up, polite, patient, and quietly furious, the world always shifts. I woke early the next morning before sunrise, before anyone else. Old habits die hard. For 40 years, I'd risen with Robert to make coffee before he left for the office. The ritual had stayed with me, even after he was gone. It wasn't about the coffee anymore. It was about clarity. And that morning, clarity was exactly what I needed. The house above me was quiet, just a faint hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of rain against the windows. From the basement window, I could see the faint blue-gray of dawn. It was peaceful but not calm. The way the air feels before a storm breaks. I sat at the little folding table I used as a desk and began writing in my notebook. Dates. Names. Comments. Every time Melissa spoke to me like I was an employee, every time Daniel avoided choosing sides, every small cruelty wrapped in politeness, I wrote it down. Not because I needed proof. Because I needed order. Robert used to say, a plan without records is just a wish, Catherine. So I made records. Around 7:30, the familiar sound of heels clicked across the kitchen floor. Melissa, rushing between coffee and conference calls. Then voices, her and Daniel, low but sharp. I told you, Daniel, you shouldn't have gone digging into the legal papers. I had to, Melissa. You told me Mom gave up her rights. It's old paperwork. She probably forgot. No, she didn't forget. You lied. A pause. Then her voice colder. You're taking her side now? I'm taking the side of the truth. I smiled into my cup of coffee. Truth, I'd missed that sound. By noon, Melissa's tone had changed. She was trying to reset the board. Catherine, she called down the stairs, honey dripping from every syllable. We're having dinner together tonight, family only. My treat. That was her new strategy. Control through performance. Show the children harmony, keep up appearances, tighten the leash behind the curtain. Of course, I said. I'll be there. But in my mind I was already 3 moves ahead. Dinner was awkward. Melissa had lit candles, played soft jazz, and cooked something overly complex. Salmon with lemon risotto that somehow tasted of nothing but tension. The children fidgeted. Daniel tried to talk about work. Melissa smiled too brightly. So, she said, spearing a piece of fish. Mom, I was thinking we could all take a trip this summer. Maybe Oregon coast? The kids would love it. I tilted my head. That's generous of you, Melissa. Will the refinancing be done by then? Her fork froze midair. Daniel looked up sharply. I just smiled. I only asked because I'd hate for you to worry about expenses. Melissa set her fork down slowly. I'm not worried. Oh, good, I said, taking a sip of wine. Because debt can weigh heavily on a marriage. The silence that followed was exquisite. Even the children stopped chewing. Daniel cleared his throat. We're fine, Mom. I'm sure you are, I said softly, as long as everything's honest. That night, after the dishes were cleared and the kids were asleep, Melissa cornered me in the kitchen. Her face was all smooth fury. You think you're clever, don't you? She hissed. I kept drying a plate, calm as a cat. I think I'm thorough. You're trying to humiliate me. No, Melissa, I said, setting the dish down. You're doing that all by yourself. Her eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. I already did, I said. The day I moved into the basement. And then I walked past her, turned off the kitchen light, and left her standing there, alone in her own silence. The next day I made an appointment at the bank. I didn't tell anyone. The young manager, a polite man with tidy hair, greeted me with the same professional cheer I'd once used on difficult parents at school. How can I help you today, Ms. Monroe? I'd like to review all accounts associated with the Monroe Family Trust, I said. My husband, Robert, established it. He typed paused. Ah yes. You're listed as co-founder. You still hold power of oversight. That was the word that mattered, oversight. Could you print a statement for the last year? I asked. When he handed me the pages, I didn't need to be an accountant to understand. Large withdrawals. Transfers to unfamiliar names. Melissa's signature, electronic but legal. She'd been moving money out for months. Not enough to raise alarms, just enough to bleed the trust dry. And Daniel? He'd signed off on none of it. I left the bank with the papers tucked in my bag, my pulse steady, my steps unhurried. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was resolve. That night I didn't confront anyone. I baked instead. Robert's favorite pecan pie. The smell filled the house, warm and sweet. When Daniel came home he smiled. Smells like old times, he said. It is old times, I replied. Just rewritten. Melissa didn't join us. She stayed upstairs pretending to work, pretending not to feel the balance shifting beneath her feet. A week later I made my second quiet move. I called the family's longtime attorney, Mr. Jeffries, a patient man who'd handled Robert's affairs for decades. Catherine, he said warmly, I was just thinking about you. What can I do? I need to update my life estate documents, I said. And I'd like to discuss financial misuse within the trust. A pause. Then by whom? I smiled faintly. By someone who thought I wasn't paying attention. That meeting was the beginning of the end. Jeffries confirmed what I suspected. Melissa had refinanced the house twice in 2 years, using the trust as collateral, technically legal but ethically poisonous. She'd gambled with the very home Robert and I built. But because of the life estate clause she couldn't sell it or force me out. She could only suffocate me with discomfort, unless I suffocated her with truth. So I began preparing for one last dinner. The kind of dinner that ends stories instead of starting them. Daniel, Melissa, the kids, all together at the same table. No shouting. No accusations. Just a quiet unveiling. Robert used to say, "Architecture is just controlled revelation." I decided revenge was too. By the time I set the table that evening, I wasn't nervous. Every plate, every folded napkin, every candle I lit was a declaration. I built this home, and I'm about to reclaim it. That morning I woke up to the sound of birds tapping at the window well. The sun had barely climbed over the cedar trees behind the house, but I was already dressed. I had a plan, and plans, I've learned, don't wait for courage, only for timing. I spent the early hours baking bread and preparing a roast, the same kind Robert and I used to make on Sundays when Daniel was still young enough to think the smell of rosemary meant safety. It wasn't nostalgia. It was strategy. People lower their defenses around comfort food. By noon, I'd polished the silverware. The set Melissa never used because it was too old-fashioned. I brought out Robert's wine glasses, the ones we'd received at our wedding, etched with our initials, R&C. Each clink was deliberate, like punctuation. Melissa came down around 2, still in her robe, scrolling on her phone. She froze when she saw the table. "What's all this?" I smiled. "Dinner. Family dinner. I thought we could all use a nice evening together." Her eyes narrowed. "You didn't ask." "I didn't know I needed to," I said, folding a napkin. "This is, after all, my home too." That sentence hit her like a slap. She turned away without replying, but her silence spoke enough. By 5, the roast was resting, the pie was cooling, and the candles were ready to be lit. Daniel arrived first, smelling of rain and engine oil. "Wow," he said, looking around. "You've really gone all out, Mom." "I thought we deserved a meal that felt honest," I said. He frowned, confused but intrigued. The children came next, running in with laughter that always felt like sunlight I hadn't earned but still cherished. Then came Melissa, carefully dressed, makeup flawless, that mask of composure she wore whenever she feared losing control. She stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. "Looks lovely," she said tightly. I gestured to the table. "Let's eat." Dinner began like all uneasy gatherings. Too much small talk, too little air. Daniel asked about the kids' school. Melissa complimented the seasoning with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I poured wine like a priest performing a ritual. Then, when the plates were half empty and the tension thick enough to cut, I said, "I stopped by the bank last week." Melissa's fork froze. Daniel looked up. "The bank?" "Yes," I said, taking a sip of wine. "I wanted to review the trust Robert set up. I found some interesting transfers." Melissa's face drained of color. "I don't think this is an appropriate dinner conversation," she said quickly. "I think it's the perfect time," I replied. "Families should eat with transparency, don't you agree?" Daniel's brow furrowed. "What transfers, Mom?" I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table. Cream-colored, neat, deliberate. Bank statements, signatures, loan documents. Melissa's name printed over and over like a confession. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Daniel picked up the first page and read. His eyes widened as the truth unfolded line by line. Home equity withdrawals, private accounts, interest-bearing loans in her name. "Melissa," he said slowly, "what is this?" She tried to laugh. "It's nothing. Investments. You know I've been managing." "Without telling me?" "I didn't need to tell you everything." The children went quiet. Even the candles flickered lower, as if the air itself didn't want to intrude. I didn't interrupt. I let silence do its work. It's more persuasive than shouting. Finally, Melissa turned on me. "This is your fault. You're poisoning him against me." I leaned back in my chair. "Melissa, I didn't poison anything. I just opened the window." The smell was already there. Daniel looked at me, torn between disbelief and dawning understanding. "Mom, how long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "Long enough to remember that your father built this home on trust, and you can't refinance trust." The fight that followed wasn't loud, but it was final. Melissa tried to spin stories, twist words, make me the meddling old woman. But Daniel had the documents in his hand now. And once you see proof, love can't blind you anymore. When she realized she'd lost him, her tone shifted. I did it for us, she said softly, almost pleading. For the family. You know how expensive everything is. Your mother doesn't understand how the world works now. I met her gaze steady. You're right. I don't understand how someone can use family as collateral. Dinner ended without dessert. Melissa stormed upstairs, Daniel followed. The children retreated to their rooms. I stayed behind, clearing the table in silence. It wasn't victory I felt. It was something colder, cleaner, completion. As I washed the last dish, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. I didn't look angry. I looked free. The next morning, Daniel came to the basement, same as he had weeks ago, but this time he looked older, as if truth itself had aged him overnight. She's moving out, he said quietly. I didn't ask her to, I replied. I know, but she's embarrassed. She said she can't live in a house that isn't hers. I folded my hands. Well, she's right about that. He smiled faintly, sad and small. Mom, he said. Thank you. For what? For not shouting. For not ruining everything just to be right. I shook my head. Daniel, there's no victory in breaking people. Sometimes you just have to let them see themselves. He left after that, and for the first time in months the house felt still, not tense, not heavy, just still. I brewed tea, carried it to the porch, and watched the sky shift colors. Rain gold blue. The kind of light Robert used to say was made for forgiveness. But I didn't forgive Melissa. I didn't need to. Forgiveness is for people who still want space in your life. I only wanted my peace. 3 days later, a moving truck arrived. Melissa supervised quietly, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. We didn't speak. She carried her boxes like a woman leaving a battlefield she'd started. And when the truck pulled away, I felt no satisfaction, just an absence, like a storm that finally ran out of thunder. That night, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table. I don't know how to fix all this, he said. You don't need to fix it, I told him. You just need to learn from it. He nodded slowly. And you? What will you do now? I looked around the house, the walls Robert built, the rooms filled with ghosts and sunlight. I'll live, I said. And maybe for once I'll live upstairs. As I carried my boxes back up from the basement, the air felt lighter. Each step was a reclamation, not of space but of self. When I reached the top, I looked around and whispered, Welcome home, Catherine. And for the first time I believed it. For the next few weeks, the house was quieter than it had been in years. The kind of quiet that didn't ache, the kind that hummed gently like a sigh after a storm. Melissa was gone, and her perfume, her laughter, her presence. All of it vanished as quickly as the fog burns off in morning light. Daniel worked longer hours now. He was rebuilding, I think. Not just his finances but his sense of self. Every evening he'd come home looking tired but more grounded, like a man who'd finally stopped pretending not to know what peace felt like. The children adjusted faster than either of us expected. They still asked about their mother sometimes, but not in the way that broke hearts. More like a memory passing through. Emma said once, Grandma, you always make the house smell better. I smiled. That's called home, sweetheart. For the first time in a long while, I had routines again, small, deliberate ones that gave shape to my days. I'd wake before dawn, open the curtains upstairs, and make coffee in Robert's old French press. I'd read by the window, feed the birds, write in my notebook. Sometimes I'd even bake too much and take a pie to the neighbors. I wasn't lonely. I was alive. Then one afternoon in early spring, a letter came, thick, official-looking, with Melissa's handwriting scrawled across the return address. I sat at the table, turning it over once, twice. I'd been expecting it. People like Melissa don't vanish quietly. They retreat, gather, and come back sharper. I tore it open carefully. Catherine, I'm writing to inform you that I intend to contest the house deed transfer and the trust. I believe you manipulated Daniel and violated the intent of the family estate. I'm consulting legal counsel. You'll be hearing from my attorney. No apology. No remorse. Just pure entitlement. Printed in black ink. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and smiled. Robert used to tell his students that foundations only matter if they're built to last. Melissa was about to find out what happens when you try to shake one that's been standing for 40 years. 2 days later, Daniel came home holding his own letter, the same one. She really did it, he said quietly, sitting at the table. She's claiming you manipulated me. I poured him coffee, calm as still water. Do you believe that? Of course not. Then we'll be fine. He rubbed his face. I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't see what she was doing. Not for years. I touched his hand. That's what love does, Daniel. It makes us look through fog and call it sunrise. He nodded, silent. We didn't speak of it again that night. But he left the kitchen looking lighter somehow, like the apology had been waiting in his chest for too long. A week later, I met with Mr. Jeffries, our family lawyer, in his downtown office. He greeted me with that same amused patience he'd always had. Melissa Hayes, he said, flipping through papers, is in for a surprise. Her claim is baseless. The deed is ironclad. Your rights are protected under both the life estate and the trust. He looked up at me. Would you like to pursue counteraction? I shook my head. No lawsuits. I want her to exhaust herself. Let her spend money chasing something that doesn't exist. He grinned. Classic Catherine Monroe strategy. Win by doing nothing. Not nothing, I corrected. By waiting. Months passed. The case never made it to court. Her lawyer must have realized what she hadn't, that I wasn't an obstacle. I was the foundation itself. And you can't sue gravity. It was summer again by the time I saw her next. She showed up without warning. Just drove up the gravel path one morning while I was watering the roses. Her car was new, but her face wasn't. It carried exhaustion like an old scar. She stepped out, careful, like she was afraid of stepping on the wrong memory. Catherine, she said, we need to talk. I set down the watering can. All right. She looked around the garden, avoiding my eyes. I'm not here to fight, she said. I just wanted to explain. Go on. She took a deep breath. I panicked. I made mistakes. I thought the money would help. I didn't mean to hurt Daniel. Or you. Her voice cracked on the last word, but I didn't move. Do you want forgiveness? I asked softly. I don't know, she said. Maybe I just don't want to be hated. I looked at her. This woman who had once tried to bury me in a basement, and saw not a villain but a lesson. She wasn't evil. She was small. Small in spirit, small in vision, small in her understanding of what love costs. I don't hate you, I said. I just finally stopped letting you write my story. She blinked. So what happens now? Now. I smiled faintly. Now you live with what you built. And I live with what I rebuilt. She nodded once, turned and left. I watched the car drive down the road until it disappeared into heat shimmer. And just like that, she was gone. For good this time. That evening, Daniel came home early. He'd heard from a friend that Melissa was leaving town, taking a job 2 states over. He didn't know she'd come to see me. He sat on the porch steps while the kids played in the yard. Mom, he said quietly, I think she's finally out of our lives. I nodded. Good. Let her find something new to break. He smiled sadly. You're stronger than I ever realized. No, I said, watching the sunset. I'm just done pretending weakness is grace. That night I sat at my desk and opened my notebook again. The last entry from months ago stared back at me. Patience isn't silence. It's precision. I added one more line beneath it. And peace isn't forgiveness. It's freedom. Then I closed the notebook and went upstairs. Not to the basement, not to hide, but to sleep in my own bed under my own roof, surrounded by everything I refused to lose. The next morning, when the light came through the curtains, it felt different. Not brighter, not softer, just mine. The following autumn rolled in quietly, the kind of season that doesn't announce itself. Just drifts in on the back of cool wind and golden light. The kids went back to school, Daniel worked steady hours again, and for the first time in years, there were no slammed doors, no tension hiding under polite words. Just a rhythm. Ordinary, gentle, unremarkable. And I adored every second of it. I had space to breathe again, to exist without walking on eggshells. The air in the house felt lighter. Even the floorboards creaked differently. I'd read somewhere that houses hold on to energy, that they remember who loves them and who doesn't. If that's true, this one was finally beginning to forgive us. I started fixing small things around the place. Robert had taught me how to repair just about anything that didn't require a blowtorch. I replaced squeaky hinges, restained the porch railing, even patched up the basement ceiling where the leak used to drip onto my pillow. Every repair felt symbolic. It wasn't just about fixing wood and nails. It was about healing what they tried to break in me. Daniel offered to help sometimes, but I could tell he needed his own peace. He was learning to be both father and mother to the kids for a while, and though I could see the weight of that in his eyes, I also saw something else: growth. He'd stopped asking me for help with everything. He'd stopped relying on me like a crutch. He was learning how to stand on his own again. And that, to me, was the real victory. On a chilly Saturday morning, I decided to visit the farmer's market downtown. It was one of those things I'd stopped doing when Melissa ruled the schedule. Too crowded, she used to say. But now there was no one to stop me. I wore Robert's old denim jacket and a scarf that still smelled faintly of lavender. The market was alive, vendors shouting about peaches, kids chasing each other between stalls, the smell of cinnamon and roasted nuts in the air. I wandered for an hour, bought honey, and chatted with strangers like I hadn't done in years. It felt like waking up from a long, polite coma. That's when I saw him, standing by a booth of old books, thumbing through a worn copy of Walden. Tom Henderson. I hadn't seen him in over 30 years. We'd taught at the same high school once, before Robert started his firm and we'd moved closer to the city. He was older, of course, grayer, slower, but when he looked up and recognized me, his face lit up like no time had passed at all. "Catherine Monroe," he said with a smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "Still alive and causing trouble, I hope." I laughed genuinely. Barely alive. As for trouble, maybe just a little. We talked for an hour right there beside the bookstand, trading small stories about who we'd been and who we'd become. He'd retired to a cabin near the coast, started painting, lost his wife a few years back. There was a tenderness in his voice that didn't sound like loneliness. It sounded like someone who'd made peace with it. Before we parted, he said, "You ever drive up the coast anymore, Catherine?" "Not lately." "You should. There's more to see when you're not running away from something." That line stuck with me all the way home, because for the first time in decades I wasn't running. I was standing exactly where I belonged. A few days later, I found a postcard in my mailbox. It was from Tom. A watercolor of the coastline. The handwriting shaky but deliberate. "Come visit sometime. The sea has a way of reminding us that nothing broken stays still for long." It made me laugh, then it made me cry, quietly, the good kind of crying, the kind that means you still feel enough to miss what might come next. Winter came. The roses wilted, the porch filled with leaves, and the evenings grew long. But it didn't feel lonely anymore. I'd sit by the fire reading, sometimes writing in my notebook, and I realized something I'd never quite let myself say out loud. I wasn't angry at Daniel. Not anymore. He'd been blind, yes. Weak, yes. But he'd also been raised by a woman who taught him that peace was worth more than confrontation. He'd just taken too long to learn the difference between kindness and silence. A week before Christmas, he came home with an envelope in his hand. He placed it on the table in front of me. "What's this?" I asked. "Something I've been meaning to do," he said. Inside was a new deed, transferring joint ownership of the house back to both of us. My name printed clean and bold. Catherine Monroe. He smiled softly. I figured it was time the paperwork matched reality. I reached across the table, took his hand, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The fire crackled behind us, the kids were upstairs laughing, and outside, snow began to fall for the first time that season. Robert would have loved that sound, the hush of fresh snow against glass. That night, after everyone went to bed, I walked through the house alone, room by room. The walls didn't echo anymore. The quiet wasn't empty, it was earned. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused, looking down toward the basement door. The light there was off now, the space empty, but I smiled anyway. That basement had once been my exile. Now it was just a reminder of how high I'd climbed back up. I poured myself a small glass of wine, sat in Robert's armchair, and whispered into the dark, "You be proud, love." I finally stood up. And somewhere between the creak of the old house and the hum of the fire, I swear I could almost hear his voice again. Soft, amused, steady as ever. "Took you long enough, Catherine." Spring returned, gentle and green, the way it always does when life insists on reminding you that nothing, not even sorrow, lasts forever. By then, a whole year had passed since Melissa's departure. The house no longer felt like a place that held ghosts. It felt alive again, full of movement and laughter. The children ran through the halls with muddy shoes and loud voices, and instead of cringing at the noise, I cherished it. Noise meant living. I had begun to fill my own days differently. Morning walks by the lake. Lunches with old friends I hadn't seen in decades. A pottery class every Thursday, where my hands remembered what it was to shape something soft into something strong. Sometimes Daniel would come home and find me in the garden, dirt under my fingernails, humming to myself like someone half her age. He'd smile and shake his head. "You don't stop, do you, Mom?" And I'd grin. "Not while I'm still breathing." One afternoon, a familiar handwriting arrived in my mailbox again. A postcard, watercolor blues in soft sand tones. Tom Henderson, Seaside, Oregon. "Still painting. Still waiting for you to see the view. Bring your stubbornness, I'll bring the coffee." I laughed aloud. It had been months since we'd spoken, but I thought of him often. His calm voice, his patient humor, his way of listening without trying to fix things. Robert had been like that too. Maybe that's what made the world feel safe again. Realizing that kindness wasn't gone, just waiting in new forms. So I decided to go. The drive along the coast was slower than I expected. The road wound between cliffs and fog, the ocean stretching endlessly to my left like a memory that refused to fade. When I finally reached Seaside, Tom's cabin sat at the edge of the dunes, surrounded by wild grass and gull cries. He opened the door before I even knocked. "Catherine Monroe," he said with that same smile. "You actually came." "I told you I'm done running," I replied. "You didn't believe me." He laughed and gestured inside. The cabin was small, cluttered with brushes, canvases, and the faint smell of turpentine and salt. Paintings leaned against every wall, the sea in every mood imaginable. But one on an easel by the window caught my breath. It was the house. My house. The white porch, the maple trees, the faint light in the upstairs window. He'd painted it from an old photograph he'd found on my social media, he explained, because it looked like a place where a story finally ended well. I stood there for a long time staring at it. It didn't look haunted. It looked peaceful. It looked mine. We had coffee on the porch while gulls screamed overhead. He talked about painting, I talked about gardening. Somewhere between laughter and quiet, he said, "You know, Catherine, most people think revenge means hurting someone back. I think it's what you did instead, taking back your life piece by piece." I looked out at the horizon. "It wasn't revenge," I said softly. "It was remembering who I was before they told me to forget." He nodded. "That's better than any courtroom victory." I stayed a few days. We walked the beach, collected shells, and watched storms roll in from the Pacific. At night, we'd sit by the fire, two old souls who had outlived disappointment, trading stories and silences that felt comfortable. No romance, not yet, maybe never. But there was warmth, the kind that doesn't demand or pretend. On the last morning as I was leaving, Tom handed me a small package. "For your house," he said. Inside was the painting, the one of my home. "I don't want to keep what belongs to you," he added. I touched the frame gently. "It doesn't just belong to me anymore. It belongs to what I became." Back home, I hung the painting in the living room, right above Robert's old chair. The light from the window hit it just right in the evenings, and it seemed to glow. Every visitor who saw it would say, "That looks peaceful." And I'd smile. Peace, after all, is the most expensive thing we ever buy. Sometimes at night, I'd hear the faint sound of rain on the roof. Not a leak anymore. Just the rhythm of a house that had weathered its storms and stayed standing. I'd pour a cup of tea, sit by the window, and write in my notebook one last time. "My name is Catherine Monroe. I built a home once, then lost it, then built it again inside myself. Forgiveness didn't save me. Strength did. And peace was the reward I gave myself for surviving with grace." I closed the notebook and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and maple leaves. I smiled to myself and whispered into the dark, "Robert, the house finally feels like home again." And this time, there was no echo, just warmth.